The question is that the motion be agreed to. Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the Acting Minister of Civil Defence for that. I stand here today as the Acting Opposition spokesperson for Civil Defence. It's like the Oscars here today with the amount of acting going on, but it's important that we are here today to pass this legislation. The Labor Party is generally fairly reluctant to see bills go through all their stages under urgency without any select committee process, but we looked at this bill and realised, firstly, as the Minister has stated, we've just very recently passed this bill. It's been through a very thorough select committee process. It was unanimously supported by the House, and so the substantive part of the bill that brings into force the provisions of the Civil Defence Emergency Management Amendment Act are ones that have been thoroughly worked through. The other part of the bill, as the Minister has indicated, around the requirement for building assessments is urgent in our view, and I will come, Mr Speaker, both in this speech and some other calls as we go through the stages of the bill to talk about why that is the case. So, Mr Speaker, to begin with the bill that has recently, or the Act rather, that has recently been passed here, that was supported across the House because it was seen as the first stage in a series of changes that would give New Zealand a much more robust civil defence and emergency management regime. And in particular, as the Minister has said, the Act that has been passed and will now come into force more speedily is about that transition from response to recovery. And we are learning lessons in New Zealand, quite tragic lessons in New Zealand, about the importance of that transition, about the balance between ministerial powers and the powers of local communities, and the importance of consultation with local communities about what happens in that phase. It's difficult. No one will underestimate that now that we've been through the Canterbury experience, and we're already beginning to see it with the Kaikoura earthquake. So we feel that as the first stage of the review of the legislative framework, that Amendment Act is good. There was good cross-party work when the Act went through, an SOP that Claire Curran, I know, backed around the importance of a national civil defence emergency management plan was accepted, and so we're pleased to see that coming in more speedily. There's some flexibility built into this bill, Mr Speaker, that means that local authorities who are not affected by the sequence of earthquakes that we've seen can choose whether or not they adopt the provisions now or wait until the original date that they were put in place. That's appropriate, but it is obviously in the areas where the quake has had the most effect. We want to see the provisions of the Civil Defence Emergency Management Amendment Bill come into force right away, and so we're very supportive of that part of the bill. Mr Speaker, I do want to raise, as we come to the second part of the bill, the whole question of the gaps that are in our law and the importance of us closing them now. And in doing so, I don't want to diminish any of the incredible work that has gone on in the last couple of weeks in responding to the quake by civil defence staff, by local council staff, by the emergency services. They have worked remarkably, as they always do in these circumstances, in responding in the middle of the night, in times of stress. And so I want to put on record that those people providing those services are truly valued by this side of the House and by New Zealanders generally. But what a lot of New Zealanders have been asking since the Kaikoura quake is, are we adequately prepared as a country? Do we have a robust civil defence response plan? And gaps have been found. And the absence of a proper national disaster warning system, the confusion that arose with the tsunami alerts, and also, I have to say here in Wellington, the lack of clarity and transparency around building assessments, which has been dealt with in this bill, are of real concern to New Zealanders. The fact that modern buildings like Statistics House could fail in the way they did is of real concern to New Zealanders, and I credit the Minister for starting that inquiry, and I hope that inquiry, when it comes back, will talk to us about all of those modern buildings that have not survived in the way that we would like. So New Zealanders are rightly asking those questions now, and I think it is something that the government needs to consider. Is the next stage of changes that are coming, they need to be put on the fast track as well. We've got to get through this stage of immediate recovery now, but on this side of the House we want to work with the government to bring that forward, to make sure that New Zealanders can have real confidence and that we avoid the confusion that's been caused. And while I respect the fact that local civil defence groups, the 16 of them that we have around New Zealand, play a really important role in being close to their communities and being connected with what's going on, the absence of a national disaster management system, the absence of good, clear, government-led alert systems around tsunamis, that's not on. We've got to do better than that. The government's put about $500,000 into developing a system and then shoved it onto the back burner. That has to come forward now, Mr. Speaker, to build confidence for New Zealanders. In terms of the specific element of this bill, the power to require an assessment, I strongly support that, Mr. Speaker. In my own electorate here in Wellington Central, I have now had several examples of people who are in buildings where they cannot find the assurance they need that proper work has been done. I was approached only on Monday by a group of tenants in a building who told by their building owner that their building was safe and had been assessed, asked to see that assessment and were told they couldn't see it because of privacy reasons. There is scepticism among those tenants that that assessment exists. And Mr. Speaker, the idea that after a 7.8 earthquake, building owners could do a visual inspection themselves and decide that a building was fine isn't good enough. And so the powers that are in this bill will mean that city councils, other officers will be in a position to require those checks and then see that assessment. It's hard to believe in many ways that isn't the case now. And I suspect that many New Zealanders have been operating under the assumption that it is the case. That on the Monday after the quake, when the Wellington CBD was shut, that there was a formal legislated process that was being worked through, where buildings were being assessed to a consistent set of criteria. That wasn't necessarily the case. It was in most cases. Most building owners were responsible and did the right thing and got an engineer in and did the checks they needed to do. But there are always some who won't, Mr. Speaker, and we must pass a law that gives New Zealanders assurance that there is a proper, consistent process. This is the first step in that. There is more work to do, but at the very least this will give the authorities the ability to require those inspections. It's important to note that the nature of New Zealand is changing. There are 15,000 to 20,000 people whose homes are in the Wellington Central CBD. Not the businesses, not the places they go to work, but their homes. And we have to do much better by those people in terms of the rules and regulations around them knowing that they're safe. Just leaving it to the health and safety legislation, which is what we have at the moment, is not good enough, and the government has clearly recognised that by proposing this law. Mr. Speaker, there are big concerns among people in Wellington about certain buildings, and I'm heartened to read today that the Mayor of Wellington, Justin Lester, has said that the moment this legislation is passed, it will be used. It will be used to undertake the inspections that the Council is concerned about. That's why we have to pass this bill under urgency. But I want to lay on the record in this first reading, Mr. Speaker, this is only the beginning for New Zealand getting a robust regime in place to ensure that we have the warning systems, that we have the recovery systems and the assessment systems that we need. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Acting Minister of Civil Defence for the way he has gone about including parties across the House in the development of this legislation. I want to thank the officials who have worked incredibly hard to put it together in a short time frame, and acknowledge to the House that the Labor Party will certainly be supporting this bill.